The girl was singing to the sick horse, but the old farmer knew something was terribly wrong. From the doorway of the dusty barn, John watched Sarah, the 17-year-old he'd hired to help out. She gently stroked the neck of his prized stallion, Stardust, humming a soft, sad tune. It was a picture of compassion, but it was a lie. John's stomach was in knots. The vet had been out 3 times this week. "It's a persistent colic," he'd said, shaking his head. "But he's a strong horse. He should be responding to the treatment." He wasn't responding. In fact, Stardust was getting weaker every day. Now, as John watched Sarah lean in close, whispering words he couldn't hear, he saw it. A tiny, almost invisible glint of metal in her hand quickly slipped back into her pocket. His blood ran cold. What was that? This story is about how a simple act of supposed kindness hid a dark and calculated secret. If you believe that the truth must always come to light, support us by hitting the like button and subscribing for more incredible stories. Let us know in the comments which city you're watching from, and write the word justice if you can already feel the tension building. John was 68 years old and had run Hickory Creek Stables his entire life. He'd seen every kind of sickness in a horse. This wasn't normal. Stardust was more than just livestock. He was the grandson of a champion, the future of John's farm, which was already struggling to stay afloat. Losing him meant losing everything. He'd hired Sarah 2 months ago. She was from a neighboring town, quiet, polite, and seemed to love horses. She'd been a blessing at first. She worked hard and stayed late, often spending her evenings with Stardust after he fell ill. Everyone said she had a special touch. But after the vet left today, completely stumped, John's suspicion started to harden into a terrible fear. The glint of metal he saw, was it a needle? Why would she have a needle? The vet administered all the medications himself. He decided to play dumb for now. He walked slowly toward the stall, his old boots kicking up dust. "How's he doing, Sarah?" he asked, his voice calm, betraying none of the chaos in his mind. Sarah jumped slightly, startled. She forced a sad smile. "No change, Mr. Henderson. I was just trying to, keep him calm. Poor thing." John nodded, looking into Stardust's tired, glazed eyes. The horse barely had the energy to lift its head. He had to know the truth. John's initial suspicion was now a full-blown investigation. He would have to watch her every move, searching for anything out of place. This quest to save his horse was about to uncover a betrayal so deep it would challenge everything he thought he knew about people. He had to be careful. He had to be certain before he made an accusation. But how do you prove the unthinkable against someone who looks so innocent? And what happens when a kind old man is pushed too far? John's world shrank to the size of his farm, every corner a potential clue. He started his quiet investigation the next day. He told Sarah he had to run to the feed co-op in town, an errand that should take a couple of hours. Instead, he drove his truck down the road, parked it behind a thicket of pine trees and walked back, staying out of sight. He positioned himself in the hayloft of the main barn, where a small gap in the floorboards gave him a clear view of Stardust's stall. For the first hour, nothing happened. Sarah did her chores exactly as she was supposed to. She mucked out the other stalls, refilled the water troughs, and swept the aisle. She was efficient, almost robotic. John started to wonder if his mind was playing tricks on him, if the stress of Stardust's illness was making him paranoid. Maybe the glint of metal was just a key or a buckle on her jeans. He felt a pang of guilt for doubting the girl. Then she pulled out her phone. She looked around, her eyes scanning the shadowy corners of the barn. Convinced she was alone, she put the phone to her ear. John couldn't hear the words, but he could see her face. It wasn't the sad, compassionate expression she showed him. This was different. It was cold, hard, and tense. She nodded several times, her lips moving in short, clipped sentences. The call lasted less than a minute. As soon as she hung up, her entire demeanor changed. The mask of the caring, stable hand was back on. She walked to Stardust's stall. She didn't sing this time. She looked at the magnificent but fading animal with an expression John couldn't decipher. It wasn't pity. It was something closer to assessment, like she was checking on a job's progress. She reached into her pocket. John held his breath. She pulled out a small, dark glass vial and a syringe. It was so fast, so practiced. She drew a small amount of clear liquid into the syringe, expertly flicking it to remove any air bubbles. John's heart hammered against his ribs. This was real. It was happening. She quietly entered the stall. Stardust was too weak to react. Sarah whispered something to the horse, stroking his neck to soothe him, just as he'd seen her do before. Then, with a swift, hidden movement, she injected the contents of the syringe into the horse's hip, in a spot that would be covered by the stable blanket. She withdrew the needle, slipped it and the vial back into her pocket and walked out. A few minutes later, she found Stardust groaning, taking a turn for the worse, and she ran to the house calling John's name with fake panic in her voice. The scene was perfectly staged. John stayed hidden in the loft, his mind racing. This wasn't a simple act of cruelty. This was calculated. It was methodical. But why? The question burned in his mind. This quiet girl from a nearby town had no reason to destroy him, or so he thought. He needed more than just his own word against hers. He needed proof, and he needed to know who was on the other end of that phone call. The next morning, John put his plan into motion. He knew he couldn't confront her directly. He had no tangible proof, only what he'd seen from the hayloft. A clever lawyer would tear his story apart. He needed something undeniable. He went to a small electronics store in the next county and bought a tiny audio recorder, the kind journalists use for interviews. It was no bigger than his thumb. That afternoon, he called Sarah to the house. "I have to make a run to the city," he said, his voice heavy with fake exhaustion. "My sister, she's not well. I might have to stay overnight. I need you to look after things. Can I trust you with Stardust?" He watched her face carefully. A flicker of something. Satisfaction? Relief? Crossed her features before being replaced by a look of deep sympathy. "Of course, Mr. Henderson. Don't you worry about a thing. I'll take care of him like he's my own." The words made John's skin crawl. Before he left, he went to the barn for one last check. While Sarah was busy mixing feed on the other side of the barn, John quickly and discreetly attached the magnetic recorder to the metal frame on the underside of the feed bin in front of Stardust's stall. It was a high-traffic area. She spoke to the horse there often. It was a long shot, but it was his only shot. He then got in his truck and drove away, once again circling back to his hiding spot in the woods. The waiting was agony. Every minute felt like an hour. Night fell. The barn was lit by a single dim bulb. Around 8 p.m., just as he'd expected, Sarah's routine began. He watched through his binoculars from the edge of the woods. She did her final check of the horses, and then her phone came out. This time, she walked right up to Stardust's stall, leaning against the feed bin where the recorder was hidden. John prayed the device was working. Her voice was a low murmur, carried on the night air, but her posture was tense. John waited another hour after she left before he crept back to the barn. His hands trembled as he retrieved the recorder. He hurried back to his truck, the cold night air doing nothing to cool the fire in his gut. He plugged the small device into a portable player with his headphones. At first, there was only the sound of the wind, the occasional rustle of hay, and Stardust's labored breathing. Then he heard Sarah's voice, clear as day. "It's taking longer than we thought," she said, her tone clipped and impatient. A man's voice replied from the phone's speaker, tinny and distorted but audible. "He's an old man. He's not watching. What's the problem?" "The horse is strong." "It's fighting it," Sarah snapped back. "I had to give it another dose. We need to be done with this before he gets a second opinion from a state vet." The man's voice was sharp. "Don't get sloppy, Sarah. My father wants that land. He's been trying to buy it for years. With that prize horse gone, the old man will be bankrupt in 6 months. He'll have no choice but to sell. Just finish the job." John ripped the headphones from his ears. His blood turned to ice. My father. The voice on the phone, he recognized it now. It was Mark Renshaw, the son of his neighbor, Richard Renshaw. Richard had been trying to lowball him for his property for the past decade, wanting to expand his massive commercial farm. John had always refused. Suddenly it all made sense. The inexplicable illness, Sarah's meticulous cruelty, the secret phone calls. This was never about a sick horse. It was an attack. They were systematically destroying his legacy, his home, his life, all for a plot of land. The emotional story he thought he was in the middle of was gone. Now, it was about revenge. John didn't sleep. He sat at his oak kitchen table, the small audio recorder in front of him, and let the rage burn. It wasn't a hot, reckless anger anymore. It was cold and sharp. The recording was his proof, but he knew it wasn't enough. A good lawyer would claim it was a fake, or that it was inadmissible, recorded without consent. Going to the police now would be a mistake. It would show his hand, and the Renshaws would slip away. No, he wouldn't give them that satisfaction. He would build a cage for them piece by piece, and they would walk into it themselves. His first priority was Stardust. If he confronted Sarah, she'd be gone, and he'd never know exactly what she was using. He needed to identify the poison. He spent hours online, cross-referencing Stardust's specific symptoms, the colic that wasn't colic, the lethargy, the slight tremor in his muscles, with agricultural toxins. He narrowed it down to a handful of potent, slow-acting chemicals, things you could find in certain pesticides or rodenticides if you knew where to look. The next day, John put on the performance of his life. He walked out to the barn with his shoulders slumped, his face a mask of grief. He saw Sarah watching him. "The vet called," John said, his voice cracking. "He wants to discuss options, to end his suffering." He let the lie hang in the air. Sarah's expression was a perfect blend of sorrow and sympathy. "Oh, Mr. Henderson, I'm so sorry. I'm not giving up yet," John said, forcing himself to look her in the eye. "I've been thinking. Maybe it's a sign. Maybe it's time to retire." He saw it again, that same flicker of victory in her eyes. "I might have to call Richard Renshaw, see if his offer for the farm still stands." This was the bait. He needed to make her believe she was winning, that the plan was working perfectly. Later that day, Richard Renshaw himself drove up. He got out of his shiny new truck, a stark contrast to John's dusty farm. He was a big man with a smile that never reached his eyes. "John, I heard about Stardust," Richard said, his voice dripping with fake concern. "Tough break. Awful business." "That is what it is, Richard," John replied, playing the part of the defeated old man. "Listen, my offer still stands," Richard said, getting straight to the point. "You're getting older. This place is a lot to handle. I can take it off your hands, give you a fair price. You can move to the city, be comfortable." The arrogance was suffocating. John just nodded slowly. "I'll think about it, Richard. I've got a lot on my mind." As Richard drove away, John knew his plan was working. They were getting arrogant. They felt him weakening, and that's exactly where he wanted them. He now had a ticking clock. He had to find the poison and an antidote before the act became reality and he actually lost his horse. The pressure was immense, but for the first time in weeks he felt a sense of control. They thought they were the predators, circling their prey. They had no idea the trap was already being set. John knew he couldn't risk searching Sarah's room in his own house. It was too close, too easy for her to walk in. He needed to know where she went when she wasn't on his farm. He followed her. After her shift 2 days later, he got in his old truck and trailed her car at a safe distance. She didn't drive back to the neighboring town she claimed to be from. Instead, she took a series of back roads to a small, dilapidated rental cabin about 5 miles away, hidden deep in the woods. It was the perfect place for a secret. He waited until she left the next morning for her shift at his farm. The cabin door was locked with a cheap padlock that he broke with a tire iron. The air inside was stale. The place was barely furnished. A mattress on the floor, a small table, a few clothes. It was the sparse living space of someone who didn't plan on staying long. He began to search, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and adrenaline. He checked under the mattress, in the small closet, in the bathroom. Nothing. He was about to give up when he noticed a loose floorboard under the small rug. He pried it up with the tire iron, and there it was. A small box containing several dark glass vials, the same kind he'd seen her use, along with a supply of new syringes. One vial had a label with a chemical name he recognized from his late-night research. He'd found it. He quickly took a photo of the label with his phone. This was the proof he needed. But underneath the vials was something else. A small, worn, leather-bound journal. He knew he shouldn't. It was an invasion of privacy, but he was far beyond caring about politeness. He opened it. The first few pages were filled with teenage angst, doodles, and dreams, but as he flipped further, the entries became darker. He found one from 6 months ago. He called today. Father called. After all these years. He never wanted to see me before. Now he needs something. He needs a favor. He said if I do this for him, he'll finally acknowledge me. I can be part of the family. I can have a real name. John felt a cold dread creep up his spine. He kept reading. The target is an old farmer, Henderson. Father says he's stubborn and standing in the way of our future. I just have to make his prize horse sick. Sick enough that he has to sell the farm. He says it's a simple job. He gave me the stuff, showed me how to use it. A little bit each day, slow so no one suspects. The final piece clicked into place, and it was more twisted than he could have ever imagined. Sarah wasn't just some girl hired by the Renshaws. She was Richard Renshaw's illegitimate daughter. This whole cruel, calculated attack wasn't just for land or money. For Sarah, it was a desperate, pathetic audition to win the love of a father who had discarded her. For Richard, it was a way to get what he wanted while using his own forgotten child as a weapon, ensuring his hands stayed clean. John closed the journal. The betrayal was now absolute. It wasn't just business. It was a profound family sickness that had spilled onto his land and threatened to poison everything he held dear. He put the journal back, closed up the floorboard, and fixed the lock on his way out so she wouldn't know he'd been there. His plan for revenge just became far more personal. He wasn't just going to take them down. He was going to use their own dark secret to burn their world to the ground. Part 6. Approx 600 words. The knowledge about Sarah's identity changed the game. John wasn't dealing with a simple criminal. He was dealing with a wounded girl, and that made her dangerously predictable. Her weak point was her desperate need for her father's approval. John would use that. His first move was to save Stardust. With the photo of the poisons label, he called a trusted equine vet 2 states away, a man he'd done business with years ago. He concocted a believable story. "I had a disgruntled employee," John said. "I think he might have been poisoning my stallion out of spite. I found this chemical in his locker after I fired him." He emailed the photo. The vet recognized it immediately. "That's nasty stuff, John. It's designed to be slow and hard to trace. But there's an antidote. It's expensive, but it works if you catch it in time." The antidote arrived the next day in a discreet package. That night, under the cover of darkness, John administered the first dose to Stardust. He felt a surge of hope as the medicine entered the horse's system. He was now fighting back on 2 fronts. His next move was psychological. He started setting a new trap, not for Sarah, but for Richard. The following afternoon, he called a legitimate real estate company that specialized in large agricultural land deals. He did it from the barn, knowing Sarah was within earshot. He spoke loudly, his voice full of false energy. "Yes, I'm calling about an appraisal for my property, Hickory Creek Stables," he said into the phone. "I've received some local interest, but I've been told a national developer might offer a much higher price." "Yes, the full 300 acres. He saw Sarah freeze at the other end of the barn. He continued the fake conversation for another 5 minutes before hanging up. The seed of doubt was planted. If John sold to a big corporation, Richard Renshaw wouldn't get the land, and Sarah's cruel work would have been for nothing. He wanted to create friction between the conspirators. Then, he turned his attention to Sarah. He began to treat her not with suspicion, but with a weary kindness that was designed to get under her skin. "You know, Sarah," he said to her as she brushed one of the other horses, "a man's legacy isn't his land, it's his family. It's the people who carry his name with honor." He looked at her, his eyes holding a deep, knowing sadness. "My father, he wasn't a rich man, but he gave me his name, and that's worth more than all this land put together." He saw her flinch. His words hit their mark. He was no longer just the victim. He was the director of this play, and his actors were beginning to forget their lines. He saw Stardust nicker and take a few solid steps toward his water trough. The antidote was working. The tide was turning. Part 7. Approx 600 words. John Henderson was no longer a simple farmer. The past few weeks had forged him into something harder, more patient, and far more dangerous. He'd been a man who tended to life. Now, he was a man cultivating a trap. His growth wasn't measured in empathy, but in strategic resolve. He was going to win. His transformation was most visible in his interactions with his enemies. When Mark Renshaw, Richard's arrogant son, paid him a visit, John was ready. Mark cornered him by the fence line, dispensing with his father's pretense of sympathy. "My dad tells me you're thinking of selling," Mark said, his tone impatient. "You should take his offer. It's more than this broken-down place is worth, especially with your prize horse about to die." The old John would have gotten angry, would have told the boy to get off his land. The new John simply gave a tired sigh. "Everything dies, son. It's just a matter of when." His calm, defeated response infuriated Mark, who was expecting a fight. John's passivity was a weapon, lulling them into a false sense of security. They saw a broken old man, not the calculating opponent he had become. The most significant challenge, and the greatest proof of his success was Stardust himself. The horse was getting visibly better. The antidote was working miracles. The glaze in his eyes was gone, replaced by a bright awareness. He was eating again, and his powerful legs no longer trembled. This created a new problem. Sarah noticed. "Mr. Henderson," she said one afternoon, unable to hide the confusion in her voice. "Stardust. He seems to be rallying. It's a fighter's spirit," John said calmly, looking at the horse with genuine affection. "Sometimes when things look their darkest, you find a strength you didn't know you had." He looked directly at Sarah when he said it. She looked away, unnerved. Her panic began to show. John knew what she was thinking. The plan was failing. Her father would be angry. The next night, John waited and watched from the hayloft again. As he predicted, Sarah's desperation made her reckless. She approached Stardust's stall not with a small, discreet syringe, but with a much larger one, clearly intending to administer a massive dose to finish the job. But John was prepared. As she fumbled in the dark to open the stall's latch, John flipped a switch. A set of powerful floodlights he'd installed that morning lit up the entire area, bathing her in brilliant, unforgiving light. She froze like a deer in headlights, the large syringe clutched in her hand. At the same moment, a second figure stepped out of the shadows from the other end of the barn. It was the local sheriff, a man John had finally called, but not with a shaky story or an illegal recording. He had called him with a simple, verifiable claim. "I believe someone is trespassing on my property and attempting to harm my livestock, Sheriff, and I can prove it." The proof was right there, illuminated for all to see. Sarah was trapped. John's transformation from victim to victor was almost complete. The hunter had snared his prey. Próximo. Só pare quando terminar a parte CTA com número de palavras correto. Show thinking compreendido. Dando continuidade à história sem pausas, da parte 8 até a chamada para a ação final. Parte 8. Approx. 700 words. With Sarah in the back of the sheriff's car, her face pale and streaked with tears, the first domino had fallen. The syringe, now sealed in an evidence bag, was the physical proof John needed. He knew what would happen next. Sarah, a scared 17-year-old facing serious charges, would confess. She would tell them everything to save herself. But John also knew that Richard Renshaw was a powerful man with expensive lawyers. He would paint Sarah as a disturbed and delusional employee, acting alone. He would disown her in a heartbeat to save himself. John's plan was not complete with her arrest alone. The head of the snake was still hiding in the grass. The next morning, the news spread through the small rural community like wildfire. A girl arrested at the Henderson farm. Rumors swirled. By noon, John saw Richard Renshaw's lawyer's car speed past his property. The battle lines were being drawn. That afternoon, John made his next move. He drove to a copy shop in the next county and made a high-quality anonymous copy of a single page from Sarah's journal, the page where she explicitly mentioned her father's promise to acknowledge her if she ruined John. He then mailed the copy, along with an unsigned note, to a freelance investigative journalist in the state capital known for taking on tough stories about powerful people. The note was simple. Richard Renshaw is not who you think he is. The official story is a lie. Look into his connection with the girl who was arrested. The real story is about a secret daughter and a conspiracy to destroy a good man for his land. He couldn't use the journal directly in court without admitting he'd broken into Sarah's cabin, but he could use it to light a fire under the media. A legal case could be contained. A public scandal was a different kind of poison, one that Richard couldn't control. As expected, the Renshaws went on the offensive. A statement was released. They were shocked and horrified by the actions of their former stable hand, Sarah, who they claimed had a history of instability. They offered their deepest sympathies to John Henderson. It was a flawless, corporate-style defense, but it was too late. The journalist had received the package. He started making calls, asking questions the Renshaws didn't want to answer. The tension on the farm was thick. John continued to nurse Stardust back to health, the horse's recovery a silent testament to his own resilience. Every day, the stallion grew stronger, and every day John could feel the Renshaw's world getting smaller. He wasn't just waiting for the police to build their case anymore. He had started a second, unstoppable attack on the one thing Richard Renshaw valued more than land, his reputation. The final confrontation was coming. John knew Richard would have to come to him to try and put out the fire himself, and John would be waiting with gasoline. Part 9, approx 800 words. The climax arrived on a grey, overcast evening. A sleek black car crunched up John's gravel driveway. Richard Renshaw got out, not with the arrogance of their last meeting, but with the grim determination of a man cornered. The media calls and the ongoing police investigation were taking their toll. He was here to end it. John met him on the porch, not saying a word. Stardust stood in the nearby paddock, strong and alert, a living symbol of Richard's failure. The sight of the healthy horse visibly angered him. "Henderson," Richard began, his voice low and strained. "This has all gone too far. That girl, she's mentally unstable, you know that. Let's be reasonable." "Reasonable?" John's voice was quiet, but cut through the air like ice. "Tell me what's reasonable about slowly poisoning an animal, Richard." Richard flinched. He opened a briefcase he was carrying. It was full of cash. "I'm prepared to offer you a settlement for the damages, for your trouble. $1 million, cash. You drop the complaints, you stop talking to the press, and this all goes away. We can call it a business misunderstanding." John laughed. It was a cold, empty sound. "My farm isn't for sale, and neither is my silence." "Every man has a price, John," Richard snarled, his composure cracking. "You're right," John said, stepping closer. "And your daughter's price was a father's approval. Did you ever plan on paying up? Or were you just going to throw her away like you did her mother?" Richard froze, his face turning ashen. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know she kept a journal," John said, delivering the killing blow. "I know she wrote down everything. The promises you made, the poison you gave her. I know everything, Richard." At that exact moment, a second vehicle skidded to a halt behind Richard's car. It was Mark. He stormed out, his face a mask of fury. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "I just got off the phone with the lawyer. The DA is offering Sarah a deal to testify against us. It's over." He then looked at John's calm face and at his father's briefcase full of cash. The realization hit him. "Shaistu, you knew about this girl? You risked our entire family, our entire company for a secret bastard child?" The confrontation John had planned had just been hijacked. The implosion was beginning. "You stay out of this, Mark," Richard yelled, his authority gone. "Stay out of it?" Mark laughed, a crazed, desperate sound. "My whole life, my inheritance, our name. You burned it all to the ground. For what? For her." The argument was no longer about John. It was a raw, brutal explosion of family secrets. As they screamed at each other, revealing years of lies and resentment, the quiet hum of a third vehicle approached. John had made one more call. The sheriff's car pulled up, its headlights illuminating the scene on the porch. The sheriff stepped out along with a deputy. They didn't need to say a word. They had heard enough of Mark's panicked, incriminating shouts to understand the full scope of the conspiracy. John Henderson stood back, his transformation complete. He didn't have to land the final punch. He simply built the arena and let the beasts devour each other. Justice wasn't just served. It was laid bare for all to see. Part 10, approx 600 words. The aftermath was swift and total, with Mark's public outburst witnessed by law enforcement and Sarah's full, detailed confession. The Renshaw empire crumbled. Richard and Mark were arrested on the spot. Their high-priced lawyers couldn't protect them from a conspiracy charge backed by a confession, witness testimony, and the physical evidence found in Sarah's cabin. The trial was the biggest news in the state for months. The story of the wealthy landowner, his secret illegitimate daughter, and the cold-blooded plot to ruin a rival was a media sensation. The Renshaws were found guilty. Their assets were frozen to pay for legal fees and damages. The sprawling farm next to John's, the land they had tried to steal through such cruel means, was seized and auctioned off to cover their debts. In their greedy attempt to take John's legacy, they had lost their own. It was the ultimate, most fitting form of justice. Sarah, for her full cooperation, received a significantly reduced sentence in a juvenile facility. Her story was a tragedy of manipulation and desperate longing. She had committed a terrible crime, but she was also a victim of her father's monstrous ambition. Her conclusion wasn't a happy one, but it offered a chance for a future, one finally free from Richard Renshaw's toxic influence. She would have to live with what she did, but she would live. Back at Hickory Creek Stables, life returned to a new kind of normal. John Henderson had won. He had saved his horse, his farm, and his home. Stardust, fully recovered, was more than just a prize stallion now. He was a symbol of their shared resilience, a living reminder of the battle they had fought and won together. The farm felt peaceful in a way it hadn't before. John had faced the worst of human nature, and had not only survived but emerged stronger. He was a changed man. The simple, trusting farmer was gone, replaced by someone wiser, more cautious, and with a core of steel forged in the fires of betrayal. He had found a darkness within himself, a capacity for cold, calculated revenge that he never knew existed. He did not celebrate his victory. He simply accepted it, like the turning of the seasons. He had protected his own, and that was enough. The quiet dignity of his farm was restored, the silence of the fields no longer threatening, but peaceful once more. Epilogue, approx 400 words. 1 year later, the sun cast long shadows across the green pastures of Hickory Creek stables. The farm was thriving. In the main paddock, 3 new foals, all sired by Stardust, chased each other on unsteady legs, their energy a sign of life renewed. The Renshaw property next door had been broken up and sold. The new owners were a young family who were quiet, respectful neighbors. The scar on the landscape was beginning to heal. John sat on his porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. He moved a little slower these days, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. He was at peace. The anger that had fueled him for so long had finally receded, leaving behind the hard-earned calm of a survivor. The mailman had left a single letter for him that day. It was postmarked from a town halfway across the state. The return address was just a P.O. box. He recognized the neat, careful handwriting from the journal. It was from Sarah. He opened it. The letter was short. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't make excuses. She simply apologized for the pain she had caused him and Stardust. She wrote that she was working now at an animal shelter in a different city, and that she was trying to build a life, a real one this time. She ended the letter with a simple sentence: "I hope your horse is strong and happy. You were a better man to him than my father ever was to me." John read the letter twice. He then folded it carefully and placed it on the small table beside him. He didn't smile, nor did he frown. His expression was unreadable as he looked out at his fields, at the enduring legacy he had fought so hard to protect. Justice had been served, revenge had been exacted, and the wound was closed. But he knew better than anyone that some scars never truly fade. CTA, approx. 200 words. John Henderson's story shows that true strength isn't just about endurance, but about the will to fight back when everything is on the line. He didn't just save his horse. He served a cold and fitting justice to those who believed they were above the law. His victory is a testament to the fact that even a quiet man, when pushed too far, can bring an empire to its knees. If you watched until here, show your support by commenting, "I watched until the end." We're left with one final question. What do you think John should do? Should he write back to Sarah, or should he let the past remain in the past? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The fight for justice takes many forms. If you were captivated by this story of calculated revenge, you won't want to miss the video appearing on your screen right now. It's about a chef who was framed by his rival and lost everything, only to return years later to the same city with a secret restaurant and a devastating plan. Click now to see what happens next, and don't forget to subscribe.